Good afternoon. I'm Vali Nasser, the Dean of Johns Hopkins University School of Advanced International Studies. And it's my distinct pleasure to welcome everybody to today's event, which marks the launch of the Big Picture Forum, a new initiative that is housed at our Foreign Policy Institute, and it will be sponsoring programming that explores international affairs through arts and culture. Many of you may be wondering why a School of International Affairs is sponsoring an arts and culture initiative. And I think the timing for this in our conversation in international affairs is actually right. With the civil war in Syria, climate change policy in flux, and the global balance of power off kilter, it is clear that we have enough on our plates, but there's a lot more room for interpretation and new ways in which we can think about solving global issues. We do have a lot going on, but we also think that addressing global issues is more than understanding econometrics, theories of international development, or fluency in foreign languages. And while we expect our students to excel in all of these subjects, and I can assure you that they do, we also want them to be equally fluent in empathy, compassion, and be conversant in different perspectives. From conversations and exhibitions to musical performances and dance, we believe that all forms of cultural expression can push us to understand more deeply the global communities that we are engaged with, and hence think in new ways about global issues that we are so passionate about. As an institution, it would also make clear for us that as global citizens, we can contribute better to solving global issues if we are embedded in our local communities. In the strong, innovative tradition of the Foreign Policy Institute, this forum will serve as an incubator for new ideas, partnerships, and engagement opportunities that will lead to creative solutions for improving the global human condition. It is fitting that our launch event involves a collaboration with a group of leading photojournalists who have led the charge in producing work that is both policy relevant and also has social impact. They are here today representing a body of work that was produced as part of the Colorado-based Anderson Art Center Advanced Method Studies program in documentary photography. That's the first name I've seen that is more complicated and longer than our own. Ed Kashi is a photojournalist and filmmaker dedicated to documenting the social and political issues that define our times, including the consequences of oil exploration in the Niger Delta and the Kurdish struggle for self-determination. James Estrin is a senior staff photographer for the New York Times and is the co-founder and co-editor of his photography blog called Lens. Griselda San Martin is a documentary photographer currently based in New York City, whose work documents the US-Mexico border and delves into issues of immigration, deportation, inequality, and human rights violations. Kara Frame makes video at NPR and is a freelance photographer and documentary filmmaker whose work focuses on social issues surrounding women, veterans, and immigration. And Salwan Georges is an Iraqi-American staff photojournalist at the Washington Post, whose work documents Michigan's refugee community, as well as his own experience as a refugee fleeing Iraq, living in Syria, and settling in Michigan. And finally, moderating the panel discussion today will be Shamila Chaudhary, who is a fellow at the Foreign Policy Institute and senior advisor here at Johns Hopkins SAIS. She served in national security positions in the Obama administration's White House and State Department under Hillary Clinton. Shamila will be directing the Big Picture Forum and will introduce a series of compelling programming on visual arts and policy in the coming year. After the discussion, I invite you to join us on the 8th floor of this building for a reception and exhibition of work by photographers mentored by Ed Kashi and James Estrin. So without further ado, it is my pleasure to welcome you to Johns Hopkins SAIS, and I will now turn the floor to Shamila. Thank you.
Thank you, Dean Nasser. And also I'd like to thank Carla Freeman, who's the director of the Foreign Policy Institute, as well as the SAIS Library and the Facilities and Operations team as well for their generous support of this event. We've been planning this for a couple of months, and it all started with a random email that I sent to Salwan just asking if he'd like to have coffee with me because I saw his images of refugees in Dearborn, Michigan, celebrating Ramadan. And so I emailed him, and we met over at Hotel DuPont, and now we're here today. And he has kindly introduced us to this wonderful community of photojournalists, artists, creative storytellers. And I'm so happy that we have such a kind of diverse audience here today with members of the SAIS community, but also from the Washington community, because this really is one of the intentions of this initiative, to bring different communities together and offer SAIS as a place to convene and think of new ideas. And we also, because of this complicated name that Anderson Center has in your program, I just kept calling it the Washington Post thing for a while because he works at the Post. And then I started calling it the New York Times thing because of James. So, so anyway, but we're familiar with acronyms in Washington, so it's all good. So I just wanted to share kind of my vision for this project before we go into some really good conversation and questions. When I served in the US government for about 12 years, and policy making, as many of you know who've worked on it, is all about details. It's all about minutia. Who sits next to whom at a state dinner? How should you address this person? What is the appropriate title? Who does this person know, and what do you need to know about that relationship? But you can't get policy right if you don't understand the big picture. Right? And what does the big picture mean? It could mean lots of things, but for me it was quite elusive. And the way I defined it was the impact that the policies we were creating and the circumstances that we were arranging, the impact they had on people, was not always available to me as a policymaker. It wasn't accessible because of geography or because of communication barriers, but it's also sometimes not accessible by choice. My own experience of working on Pakistan and counterterrorism and the war on terror, it was the truth and the impact of American policies on foreigners was often an inconvenience or something ugly that I didn't want to acknowledge. And so I think turning to visual arts is a way to get to that content and substance that we're not always able to do in policymaking. And so there is a natural relationship, which I think we can explore through this forum. And it's not new to use visual arts or cultural diplomacy in the work of foreign policy. All kinds of foreign governments do it. You'll go to the embassies for tasting of food and different art festivals. And they don't do this just because they want you to like their culture. They do it, and the US does this too. They do it because when it comes time to deal with the difficult issues and get to the table, it's actually a lot easier to have those conversations and then sell those kind of policy outcomes to their constituents at home, right? So these people-to-people ties actually do have a strong policy impact. So that's another kind of philosophical perspective I have as I'm developing the programming over the next year. Okay, so I've been given some instructions before we start the conversation. You will see our social media hashtags on the screen. Please use them. We've been bombarding the Twitter and Facebook universe with information all week, but it's the real event, so we have to do more than what we did for the past 2 weeks, so I'm counting on you guys for that. And the Anderson mentorship program is actually a team of 15 photographers. That's why it's 15 stories. And so we have a selection, and as well as their mentors up here, but there are also 2 of the photographers in the audience. So I just want you to identify yourself. Erica Rodriguez, who came, thank you, welcome, who came all the way from Puerto Rico, welcome, and Sarah Stack. Sarah, are you here yet?
She is not.
She's not here, okay. She'll
Sorry
probably
about
be
that.
at the exhibit.
Yes.
And I'm sure that there will be a lot more people at the reception where there will be free wine and beer. So we can look forward to that. Okay, so I think those were all of, I followed all of my orders that I was given. In terms of process, we're just gonna do a couple of rounds of questions and then we'll open it up for Q&A. And then after that, we'll go upstairs and enjoy ourselves. So I'm gonna start with Ed. First of all, I want everyone, I don't know if everyone read Ed's title or his description of his kind of bio and his work. Ed Kashi is a photojournalist, filmmaker, and educator whose sensitive eye and intimate relationship to his subjects are signatures of his work. Can you imagine anyone in Washington having that kind of a title? I mean, this is beautiful. Ours would be like a couple of paragraphs, so kudos. Ed is one of the mentors at the Anderson Ranch, and could just explain to us what is the Anderson program that you run with James, and what is its goal? Why did you think of doing this?
So first, let's clear up the name. So it's the Anderson Ranch Arts Center, which I think just celebrated their 50th anniversary, and probably started by like hippies in the late 60s. And what's amazing about this place is, and it connects to kind of why we're doing this particular workshop, there is that it's not just about photography. There's woodwork, sculpture, painting. It's a multidisciplinary environment, and it's, 10,000 feet up in the Rockies. So it's quite a beautiful place to be creative and kind of let your mind think. So this is the Advanced Mentored Studies program, and Jim and I designed this, and I mean, we teach a fair bit at this point, and this is an absolutely unique, there's nothing else certainly that we've done, I don't know if there's anything else quite like this, where it's a 3-year commitment to these folks. And they're not students, they're cohorts, because most of them are professionals and are doing tremendous work. So that kind of means we have to up our game. Sal's gesture, which is why we're here, is a perfect example of what is so amazing about you guys and this program. That you went to him to have an exhibition of his work. And what did he do? He said, no, I want all 15 people's work to be shown. And that to me embodies the spirit that we have witnessed emerge from this cohort of folks. And I'm not going to cry. And so the idea, the ambition of it is that over 3 years we would work with these guys to create not just a photo essay, but a book or a film or an exhibition, website, whatever it may be, some form of media we haven't discovered yet, but it must be connected to some sort of a social or political issue, and ideally there's an advocacy element, although that's not necessary. So that, I think, in a nutshell, a big nutshell.
And it's year-round.
And it's year-round, right, exactly. So once a year we meet for 1 week all together, we convene at Anderson Ranch, and what's also great about that, it was interesting because, well, let me finish. So, and then halfway through the year, basically every other month, we have a conversation on Skype with them. But we're often talking with these folks more often than that. But what's funny is when we have our week in July, all the other disciplines, they're all there working, making sculptures and painting, and all they see us doing is like playing volleyball and partying,
And talking.
And talking, of course. And they're all like, what's up with you guys? Why aren't you working? And I realized that with the work that we do, we witness a lot of pain, suffering, violence, whatever, we witness a lot. We absorb a lot in the kinds of stories and issues we deal with. And that for us, that week together in the Rockies is actually kind of a retreat. And it's a place where we're not thinking about making new work in that week. We're thinking about how to support each other, how to express whatever it is we may be feeling, how to help move their work forward.
Well, talking and playing games sounds a lot like diplomacy as well. So, so Ed is being very generous about this program, and he himself is a trailblazer in his field in dealing with work that has social and political impact. And I have one of his images that I found to be so compelling and intriguing. I saw it on his website when I was doing some research for this. And I thought maybe you could just tell us a little bit about this image. Where are you? How did you capture this image? What were the circumstances around this?
Okay, so this is in the Niger Delta in Nigeria, and it's from a multi-year project I did looking at the impact of 50 years of oil, at that point oil and gas exploitation in the Niger Delta. Nigeria is one of the 10th largest producers of oil and gas in the world, but most people, especially in the Delta, are living on $1 a day. It's a story we hear all too often. This particular image is, I guess, probably one of the strangest fashion shoots I've ever done. But these are members of MEND, Movement for the Emancipation of the Niger Delta. This was taken in 2006, and then they were quite active in blowing up pipelines, taking expat oil workers hostage. And when I joke saying it's a fashion shoot, I mean, the reality is this is propaganda. I mean, I can't make this picture unless they've agreed that they want Western journalists, in this case, a photographer with National Geographic magazine, to document them. Because there were many times in the course of the 3 years that I worked on this where I tried to access them and I got no response. So clearly at this moment, it was in their interests to project an image of strength and power. And just to finish, the specific scene is they had taken oil workers hostage, and then the Nigerian military attacked them. So the Niger Delta is the third largest wetlands in the world. It's a vast, vast area, amazing area, place. The Nigerian military had attacked them and killed, I think it was 9 of their members. So this was the day where they were having funerals for the 9 men members who had been killed. So, yeah.
Is it?
I just have to say something else. This picture, along with some of the work I did on this project, actually was displayed here 9 years ago as part of an Oxfam, not to jump ahead, but this is about impact. So Oxfam America was advocating for a bill on extractive industries that was going through Congress at that point, basically to demand more transparency from oil, gas, mining, et cetera, extractive industries. And so Oxfam used my work to be exhibited on 10 universities around the country, and John, this was one of them. So I was actually here, not here, we were in that room. Anyway,
okay.
But it's an example, and the bill did pass. Although I think one of the first things that the new administration did was strip that amendment, but wonder why. But anyway, but it's obviously my work has a tiny, tiny, tiny role in this, this advocacy role that Oxfam was playing. But it's incredible when you can create media materials as a storyteller. You can create material that activists or advocates can use to, at least in my eyes, push for something that's positive change. And the fact that there was actually a bill that was passed is very powerful.
When Jim and I met, we spent a lot of time talking about policy impact and how photojournalism has kind of a focus amongst certain photographers to have this kind of result coming from their work. And so I think it would be helpful for our audience to know some examples of previous work that has had social impact or that has been politically relevant. Also, is this a new thing? Did this happen because of some kind of political circumstances, or have photojournalists always been kind of intrigued by impact in their work as well as just the
Both
visual
of those
experience?
are true.
Okay.
It's not a new thing because Lewis Hine was doing this and had great effect on child labor, changed the child labor laws.
So who is he? Explain for us. He was a sociologist, right?
Yes,
okay.
who photographed child labor in New York in the 19 teens, was it?
Yeah, probably 1920s, 20s.
Late teens, early 20s, and literally the child labor laws changed because of that.
Jacob Riis before him.
Yes, Jacob Riis even earlier, having to do with photographing the Lower East Side, housing situations and working situations among poor immigrants. Donna Ferrato in the 80s and 90s, her work on spousal abuse. which is really seminal work, and laws were changed because of it. The photos were displayed in state houses throughout the country, and she let anyone who was advocating use her work for free for that. More recent examples are Marcus Bleasdale, who, sometimes you want the largest audience possible because you want the most people to push for change. He was in a situation where he had an audience of 3 people that he needed for change to happen. He photographed, earlier he did the same thing with gold mining, but he photographed the mining of rare minerals, a very exploitive situation in the DRC. And what he wanted to do, this mining was supporting warlords. This is why wars were really being fought, and it was funding the wars. And so he felt that if he could stop the large chip makers from funding these wars using these minerals, then he could have an effect. So he needed to talk to Intel, the CEO of Intel, the CEO of Apple, and someone else I forget. And with the help of advocacy groups and NGOs, he had these conversations, and Intel stopped buying these rare minerals that are used in chips and used in your phones from, unless they're certified, from places that weren't funding war. So there's a lot of ways to use photographs to change, to affect change. I was going to mention Ed. Ed mentioned to me earlier, Nick Nichols in Africa about, was it elephants?
No,
Which was the lions, or?
He did the mega transect through Gabon, well, through a large swath of Africa, but they inspired the president of Gabon to actually certify like millions of acres of the country for a protected wildlife habitat.
So, photographs can be used. It's very hard to measure the effect.
That was going to be my next question.
Right, most photographers become photographers. They want to affect things. It's not necessarily a passive witness. If you work for a large American news organization, yes, you're not an advocate. You're documenting things. As a photographer, my feeling is what I can do is at least show the world what's happening so that you can't say you didn't know. And that's sort of what I can do in that area. But today, more and more photographers are using their images in advocacy. I would argue using them much more effectively, having longer lives, using different of the material having longer lives, and using a lot of modern strategies to try to affect change.
I have one of your photographs on the screen now, and the series is called The
Making of an American Imam.
Making of an American Imam. So tell us about this person and why you wanted to do this project.
Okay, so this is Sheikh Rida Shada on the right. He is an imam now in New Jersey. At the time, it was in Bay Ridge in Brooklyn, originally from Egypt. And this was in 2006. I worked with the reporter Andrea Elliott. Both of us came to the same basic story idea separately, looking at the Arab American community, particularly the Muslim community, because after 9/11, there was tremendous amount of stress on the community, prejudice, the police were all over it. And because there was an increase in stress, there was actually an increase in mental illness, which goes together. And they trained imams to know the difference between what they could counsel, because culturally in many Arab countries, they wouldn't see a psychiatrist. That's not the default position. So anyway, we went to look for someone to show everything that was happening in the community. And so Sheikh Rida, who was in Egypt a prayer leader, basically, and a scholar, the same job as an imam in the United States, he was a prayer leader. He was a social worker. He was an intermediary with the police. He did everything. You know, he was a matchmaker. A lot of people who went to his mosque weren't there with their families. And he was an amazing and beautiful man. We followed him for a year. And at first there was, not from him, but from the people around him, a lot of pushback, because at that point, everyone we ran into said that they never saw themselves reflected in the media, that either they were negative portrayals that were inaccurate or incomplete, or even if they were positive, they were simplistic. So he put himself out, we documented his life, and on the whole, the response was really positive. And you know, it's one of the work I feel proudest about, actually.
Yeah, I would encourage everyone to go to Jim's website and look at the series. It's very powerful, and what I found very special about it was it looked like, to me, the imams that I grew up with in my Muslim community, who were caretakers and matchmakers and were always smiling and, you know, wanting to make sure everyone was okay. And it was just in such stark contrast to what you see in the media. But I myself was kind of, you know, socialized to the media construct as well. And I forgot that I knew this. So I think it's an excellent tool for memory as well as like kind of talking about politics and identity. So it's really beautiful. I encourage everyone to take a look. So I want to go to Kara, who is based in Washington, D.C., and she does great video work for NPR. And we're going to show, her project is actually a documentary film, and we're going to show the trailer for that. And just bear with us for a moment when we get this right. It's just a couple of minutes long, so. We have the sound.
Sound right.
Like they're working on it. Yeah, we'll start it over.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just want to set it up also.
Why don't you set it up
Yeah,
then
set it up.
before we play it
Yeah,
while they're
set it up.
figuring it out?
Yep, set it up.
So I am the daughter of a Vietnam veteran. And growing up, I was always surrounded by that community of people. And when I went to grad school for video journalism, I decided to do a project about the long-term effects of PTSD in my parents' marriage. And once some guys that served with my dad had heard about it, they also wanted to be a part of it, and so I, through a journey, I found out about this guy that served with my dad, who was in a mental hospital because he had killed his wife. It was like 46 years after he had come home from Vietnam, and he claims that he was in a whiteout when he killed her. And so it started making me question, like, how many other veterans are in this position where, because of trauma, they have these blackouts or flashbacks, and something happens during that time that they can't recall. And sometimes that's a murder or a homicide. And so that's not exactly this veteran's story, but he did serve in Iraq, and he, after coming home, after being discharged from the army, he did murder his wife. And I'm trying to understand how his family grapples with that and still honors the service that he did for the country, while forgiving him for taking away somebody that they loved very much. So.
Are we ready? Let's see. So when the film is finished, we'll have to bring you back so we can see all of it. Yes. When is it going to be done? Are you?
I'm actually curious of that as well. It's a work in progress.
I think a lot of us can relate.
Yeah.
All right, wonderful. Well, we're having some conversations about the relationship between civilians and military veterans when they return, and we will be doing some future programming involving Kara, so you can look forward to that. So I have two questions for you. One is, how do you do this kind of project? Like, how do you convince these people to let you tell their story? They trust you. And then two, who is your audience for this? The ideal audience for this project, with that idea that you want to have policy impact or social impact in mind. Who do you want to see this?
Sure. So I feel like I kind of have an in, since my dad is a veteran. With military families, I kind of already have an in. So with this family in particular, I wrote them a letter, a handwritten letter, sent it, and linked them to a previous film that I had done, and told them that I would give them a phone call. And Joe's mom actually reached out to me and called me because they were interested in doing it. And a lot of it has to do with Alexis, who is who you hear in this trailer. It's Joe's younger sister. And she was 18 at the time when he killed his wife, and she was there. And I think she has been waiting for the right opportunity to tell her story. So they were interested, and it was much easier than I thought it was going to be to get access. And I would say my ideal audience is anybody that doesn't have a tie to a veteran of any sort. I feel like, for the most part, families of veterans, friends of veterans, they just get it. You know, trauma is like a ripple effect. It affects everybody. I know that I have had a very different childhood because my dad has PTSD. And, you know, Joe's family has an extremely different experience because of his trauma. And for people that don't grow up with that or live with that, I want to influence people to just care and to have an interest in veterans and their stories, and to understand that it's not, I mean, you just don't leave the war and you're back and that's that. It sticks with you every day. And for their loved ones and their friends as well.
Well, we look forward to the final product.
Thank you.
When it's ready. Griselda, welcome. She is here from New York, but spends a lot of time in Mexico. And maybe you could just describe your project for us, what your focus is, and then give us some background on this image as well.
So my project is about the Mexican community in New York, and especially the immigrants that come from the state of Puebla, because they make up for approximately 50% of all the Mexican immigrants in New York and New Jersey. And so I began this project many months ago, but this is something I wanted to do because specifically the current political situation, the climate that we are living in this country. And I know it's not something new. There's been deportations before, and this fear, especially when someone is undocumented, it's existed before, so it's not new. But before now, it depended a lot on where you were living. So for us in New York City, it's like a bubble. Like it was fine compared to someone living in, let's say, Maricopa County, Arizona, or even in Long Island, which is very close to New York. I mean, it's in the state of New York. So that would depend a lot, the experience of being an undocumented immigrant in this country, on where you were living. The difference now is this, the fear is more, of course, but there is this uncertainty of what's gonna happen, and maybe my life as I know it will end tomorrow because nobody knows what's gonna happen. And also there is this hostility that we have seen since the past year. And so I wanted to, my goal is to challenge this discourse of that it equates immigrants with criminals that we listen to all the time and we see all the time, because all the images or mainstream media and entertainment, everything you see about immigrants is, or they're either criminals, invaders, or they're just poor people. It's vulnerable people, victims. So I wanted to show a more complex immigrant experience. So not just focusing on the bad or the sad things, but also showing the strength and the resilience, because it's a fact that immigrants contribute a lot to this country and also to their homeland or to their home countries. And it's not just I mean, there's a lot of numbers that show this, because, for example, the remittances that Mexicans sent to Mexico in 2016, it was $27 billion. So they contribute not only to the economy here, but also to the economy back home.
That was with a B. It was billion, just to be clear.
What?
Billion, not million.
Did I say million?
No, I just wanted to make sure that...
And that's what's been reported. That's what we, I mean, and it's always probably higher.
And everything, I mean, all we listen to is, obviously you watched the State of the Union 2 days ago. It's criminal, gang member. It's always the same thing. You don't see like the other part of the experience. So I wanted to focus on that.
So I want to focus on this a little bit. You're being so diplomatic, by the way. I'm not a diplomat anymore, so I'm gonna just, and our friends on the stage who are journalists are just gonna pretend they're invisible right now because they're not allowed to talk politics. US immigration policy has always been up in the air. I mean, no one has done it well. No one has brought both sides to the table to actually have something that is acceptable. It's unresolved for a very long time. So what exactly is it that has changed in the past year? Because as we were talking earlier, like there is a wall. There's been a wall for a long time. Boeing built that wall. I know because I was having meetings with Boeing years ago about it, and I was very surprised to learn that. So in parts of the border don't have a wall, of course, but why now has this narrative become so volatile? And you mentioned the word hostility, and I think that the rhetoric and the hostility around it and the fact that the leadership of the United States is engaging in this is probably what makes it really problematic. But in real time, how do those people that you were working with in your project, like how do they think this is really going to shape their lives? Because it's not, like in real terms, the policy is, or the status of the policy hasn't really changed. The rhetoric has changed. Do they feel less safe?
It has changed, I mean, in particular for undocumented immigrants, it has changed a lot because now anytime they can just be gone. And nobody cares. I mean, somebody
and there's
cares,
no consistency or pattern
care,
associated with it. Yeah.
But for example, the Dreamers, the DACA recipients, this, I mean, they keep talking about this, but this is something that tomorrow can just, they can be gone tomorrow because it's an executive order, it's not law.
It's imminent, yeah, okay.
And this is something that in your everyday life, of course, they just don't have it's the stress, anxiety. They don't go out. I mean, it's much better now than it was exactly 1 year ago. 1 year ago, I used to go to the a couple of organizations to immigration meetings. So every week there was like a meeting, a get together, just to tell anyone who was attending the meeting just to calm down, like what to do if La Migra, if ICE comes to your doors. Don't open the door, like this kind of, because people didn't know what was gonna happen, and still now. But it's been a few months, so that the situation is, I mean, it's still bad, but.
There were a few raids like on 7-Elevens and people being followed on their way to school or work. I did see those instances, and it just makes me curious how, I would also be concerned, like how widespread is this going to be, and you don't know how to anticipate it, so.
No, and for example, about this specific thing, there were WhatsApp groups, where you would say, don't take this street because something is going on there. Like it was just anxiety about the uncertainty, because they didn't know, and still now, I mean, it's still happening.
Well, and it's probably creating a lot of mental health issues as well over the long term.
The Dreamers also, for example, for the Salvadorans or people from Haiti, the TPS, it's the Temporary Protective Status.
Yeah.
That also, I was going to Long Island a couple weeks ago to meet with a group of the Salvadoran community there, which is huge. And these people who have the TPS, they have been here since before 2001. That's when they were given this protective status, because there was an earthquake in El Salvador. And so every 18 months, they have to go and get a check with immigration. And if they've committed like a DUI or something very small, they get the TPS is taken away. So they've been since at least 2001 until now, being really good people, like following the law. And right now, all of a sudden, they're gonna take it from, that is a disruption in their everyday lives. They don't know what's gonna happen, and not only them, because they're not worried about them, I mean, they are, but especially about their kids. Because what's gonna happen if they get deported? A year ago, in these immigration groups that I was going to, the meetings, they were helping people sign papers just to, I don't remember the name of the thing, but basically it's a paper that says, if I get deported, my kids have to stay with this person. And these organizations were helping them get it signed by a notary, because it's very expensive. So all these things that you would never think.
You just gave me an idea. We should do a pop-up exhibit of your work over on the Hill. Let's just take it there and set it up in the halls. Tell us about this picture, and then I want to move to Salwan.
This is a moment that I witnessed and I was documenting because of this project, and I've been to a few more, two more, but this was a reunification event. So Mi Casa es Puebla, which is an organization that belongs to the state government of Puebla in Mexico, they brought 89 adults over 60 to reunite with their migrant children, who they had not seen in at least 10, but there were 20 and even 30 years apart. So the family members here in the US are undocumented, so they're not able to leave the country and go visit their family. And so they brought the grandparents, the parents of these migrants. And that was very emotional. Every one I've been to is very emotional.
I believe upstairs we have another image similar to this one of a woman. So it's make sure you guys go upstairs. It's going to be great. Thank you. Salwan, my friend, the reason for all of this. Tell us a little bit about your personal journey and how it led you to do this project. And before you answer, I'll just say that I think your issue of refugees in the United States is very similar to Griselda's work in that they deal with communities that have been dehumanized and have caricatures of them presented in the mainstream media in the United States. And also just in our consciousness, we've been socialized to think of certain images before we think about what it really is. So I think I see some similarities in your project, but just tell us a little bit about your personal journey and how you got to this project.
I don't know where to start.
I know, I don't know where to start either. It's such this is a fascinating gentleman, so.
No,
And tell us about the photo too.
My family, like every immigrant community that from across the world come to the United States, have hope and want a dream and want to, most of these communities, their main focus is to have a better life for their education. They would risk everything. So my dad risked his life for my family to leave Iraq because he was in the army. And he was facing a lot of, because they know he has family in the US. So a lot of, like he got his education, but he wouldn't get a higher rank in the army because just he had family in the US. So like simple things like that. And, but growing up in Iraq, I mean, I never once knew this person is Muslim, this person Christian. I remember playing in the streets in Baghdad, and I would go to a mosque with my friends. I didn't know like that was a mosque and I can't enter, or you know, just we would play soccer, then go drink free water outside the mosque, and then sit in the lesson, and my friends will come with me to church, and it was something normal. Never ever thought of faith that could divide us, like what's happening right now in Iraq. So we left Iraq in the late 90s, and then we decided to immigrate to the US, to Detroit, where my father's side of the family been there since the early 70s. Huge family, like a lot. We were like the last ones there in Iraq. And then, but because of my dad's situation, we had to escape, basically, and then stayed in Jordan for a little bit, and then we lived in Syria for 6 years.
Where did you live in Syria?
So the first year we lived in like a poor neighborhood because the Syrian government won't be looking for you, and not like my family not having any documentation, it's a risk because if you get caught, you get deported, and if Saddam knew my dad was in the army, probably, they hang him, which is something was happening. So my church, the Christian Orthodox church, decided to take us and protect us. So me and my family moved to outside of Damascus in the mountains, where the monastery exists, and we lived there for 6 years. And during that time, I tried to go to school, but you can't really go to school. You don't have paperwork, and then they would put me in a really low grade, or sometimes they would ask me for more paperwork. And imagine going to school with my family, and they said, "Oh, I'm excited. I'm 8 years old. Oh, I'm gonna finally go to school." And then they were like, "Oh, you don't have that paperwork. You can start the year with all these other children." So I did something better. I helped monks. We had olive trees, so worked in a farm, and we just took care of olive trees for 6 years.
Wonderful.
So it wasn't bad, I guess. Skipped middle school, so I heard middle school you should skip it if you can. So I guess
it's not really important until you get to grad school, right, guys?
So it kind of worked out.
It's worth it.
And then we made it to Detroit finally in 2004.
How did you get to Detroit? Why Detroit?
Because all my dad's family
they were already
established.
There. They were in Detroit,
yeah. My grandparents, this is my grandma in the picture.
And did they sponsor you? What was the...
Yeah, my grandma, well, see, my grandma made legal immigration paperwork for us that took us more than 12 years to get accepted in the United
see.
States. I remember with my family going in Syria to the U.S. Embassy and waiting in line for almost like half a day to get like to this window that they may say, yeah, we can see you today or we can't see you today. And then, you know, I mean, more than 12 years if you want to come legally, and we waited. But it's just this whole, you know, not knowing if you will get accepted or not accepted, and being yelled at, waiting in line, and you know, as a kid, you don't want to be waiting in line half a day, you know, and it's really hard, you know. But we finally made it, and then that's when I thought it's finally everything's going to be fine. And then you have the next journey, which is it's a journey that I never thought is going to be that hard to you know, live a normal life, but you can't live a normal life if you're an immigrant. You have to, or a refugee. There's a lot goes into it. There's a lot, and especially not knowing the language. I mean, people will be talking to me, and I'm just smiling. It's like, I don't know what to tell you, you know. And I mean, in English. So there's this whole struggle of not only learning the language, but getting accustomed to the culture. That's a really big thing, and good thing I had the families, big family that were there for me. But it kind of worries me when what I do every day sometimes document refugees and seeing them alone and scared and really lost in this new world. And but the one thing I see in everybody is they came with hope, and they really want to make it, and they would do anything. And unfortunately, we want to deport some of them.
Could you talk a little about the project?
Yeah.
Because that's what this project is about, right?
Yes.
Explain the project.
So the project, I remember when the first iPhone came out, I got one, and it was something really expensive for me to buy. And you know, the camera on the iPhone, it was really bad, the first one. So I just kept taking photos of my family with my phone, and then because I didn't want to bring my camera around, they would think I'm working, and they always yelling at me, you should come and eat, and we're a loud family, so it's like, you know, you can't bring, if you get yelled at, you know, you just have to stop, you know. Just,
Yeah, we didn't invite them to this.
They stayed in Detroit. So not only it was hard for me to become American, or like get used to the American, I would say that the Iraqi war has affected and changed every single member in my family, from my immediate family to all of my family. First of us immigrating, and second of losing family members. In that picture, I have my grandma holding my uncle's flag, who was a U.S. Marine and got killed in Iraq, Ramadi, by a suicide bomber. I had cousins that were kidnapped, that we had to pay ransom to get them out. I have cousins who were killed just because they were Christians, or just because they were from different faiths in Iraq, from my both sides of family. So the project is when we heard the news of one of my cousins that was killed. I started paying attention to what I'm photographing, and then decided to kind of tell my family journey, to kind of explain of the struggle, that invisible struggle that you go through as a refugee to make it, to maybe have a chance to make it in this country, if you were given the chance, of course.
The Salwan's work is also very artistic, I would say. I've been following it in the Washington Post, and so there's a lot of seriousness associated with it, but you'll find it to be very artistic. I'll just leave it at that. So please, yeah, take a look up there. So who helped you outside of your family networks? Because I want to get at the kind of the practical part of being a refugee and some of the policy kind of angles to this. You have a family network, that's great, but a lot of refugees come and they don't have that. I've met many of them in Toledo, where I'm from in Ohio, and they know no one. And it's fascinating because they will a lot of them are actually Christian. Most of them are Christian refugees, not Muslims. And they'll start building these relationships with Muslims that they weren't able to do back home, and they become each other's network. And so a lot of the support comes from these informal networks. But I would just be curious, kind of on your experience, for those of us in the audience who will work on these issues and will have to think critically about the situation of refugees, both in kind of overseas and here, it would be helpful to know.
Well, one thing talking about like some of these communities, the Muslims or Christian, not being able to work together is because of the recent changes in the region of the war and everything. Because back then, I mean, I saw with my own eyes growing up that there were no such a problem called, oh, you are Shia, or you're Sunni, or you're Christian, you can't be in this region. I mean, look what's happening in Iraq now. It's again divided into like different states and different, I mean, there are people that control different cities. I don't remember that growing up. So coming here, it's, I mean, with the recent changes in the country, there's a lot of cuts in funding for refugee agencies. I mean, I remember 2 years ago, I started working with the refugee agency in Detroit, and then now there's only one person from a staff of 100 assisting all these Syrian refugees that were making it. So a lot of the immigrants, they would go to established communities, like for example, like Dearborn, Michigan. It's the largest Middle Eastern community in the U.S. And people would just walk in the streets and talk to people, and everyone will help you with open arm. You know, they wouldn't even ask if you're Christian or Muslim or. There's established communities that helping each other.
Well, I want to thank the panelists for sharing their very personal work. It's very clear that you're coming to these projects with a personal conviction, and I think that's what makes them rich and compelling. I want to open it up for questions from the audience. We have a few minutes left before we go enjoy the work and the wine. And we'll have some of our students with microphones walking around. So please raise your hand. Identify yourself and your affiliation. Make sure your question is a question. It's an issue in Washington.
Hi, good evening, everyone. My name is Wendy Chan. I am a proud alum of SAIS 2008, so I'm here as an alum and also as a community organizer on refugee initiative. And I truly believe in the power of storytelling, so kudos to Johns Hopkins wanted to embark on this. We have been talking a lot about how to use storytelling, how to use visual art to influence policymakers, right? But what I'm doing as a community organizer is really how do we use that to mobilize the grassroots movement, right? To grassroots. So in fact, currently I'm working on a big project with a group of refugees and immigrants and like-minded people to organize a pro-refugee festival with the National Cathedral called One Journey Festival. And so my question is, from an artist perspective, like how do you, and some of the challenges that I have is that in my organizing work, a lot of times these events tend to draw people already recognize refugees issues who are already pro-refugees. So how do you approach your work if your audience is somewhat if you're trying to influence people who are on the other side of the aisle or people who are indifferent to the issues and you would like to influence their perspective?
Good question.
There's a lot of, Griselda had an exhibit in Puebla, is going to have an exhibit in the communities in Jersey and New York, but also you want to influence the people not in the community. There's a lot of different ways to do that today. You know, there's social media, there's wheat pasting on walls, there's putting exhibits not to the people who are on your side already, but maybe to the people who are maybe on the opposite side. There's today so many different ways of using photos, using it as in curriculum, developing curriculum around it.
Well, besides the forms that you might use, it's how do we get, in general, how do we get stories to the people who I feel or have fallen behind the sort of Fox firewall of information? Sorry,
Yeah.
I think there's about 20 or 30 million Americans who just actually believe in an alternative universe of facts that are not correct. And that's not a judgment, that's, to me, a fact. And so how do you reach those people who are most good folks, and sort of say, hey, your neighbor might be an immigrant or a refugee or someone in your community, and so not only to use the new ways we can tell stories, the new channels to get it out, which often now are much cheaper and more frictionless, but the key is how do you bring the eyeballs to them? So community events, I think, are a great way to do that, but it's that access to sort of the media. Local media is also a great way to work to try, but it's how do you bring these stories to people who are otherwise who need to be convinced that these folks are not criminals and all of that stuff.
But you have your New Immigrant Project.
Yeah, Newest Americans.
Newest Americans with your wife Julie Winokur, who's a filmmaker, and which is a wonderful project. But what do you do to again get it beyond the people who already agree with?
Give her the microphone. No,
seriously.
Please.
So what is
Save me.
Yeah. Oh, here we go. We got one.
Sorry. Oh my God, that was such a lateral, huh?
Oh, that was a total Hail Mary kind of moment, huh? It's the biggest question and the most difficult question, and I agree with Ed. The number one challenge we have is putting it in front of the people we most need to bridge the divide with. And so we talk in circles, we talk amongst ourselves. The fact that people are even showing up today it's a self-selecting group of people who are curious, open-minded, who want to problem solve in a much in a more humanitarian way rather than the politics of identity or the politics of America first or, the things that are the divisive policies rather than the unifying policies. So I know we're working extensively at trying to interpret what we're doing for education, because I think until we can infuse this information across the country into K-12, college level and graduate level work, that it's going to be really hard to change minds who are so deeply entrenched and have spent such a long time hearing a certain perspective of the world. So I think we do a terrible job inviting other people to these events. Consciously saying, we want you in this room. We know you don't agree with us, but we want you in this room. And I would urge you with your refugee event, don't just allow it to be self-selecting. There are religious groups out there who are fighting against the very, humanitarian issues we're talking about. So they need to be contacted, they need to be invited, and they need that olive branch extended that says, we need to solve this, so can we be in the room together? We do a terrible job of that, so perhaps that's where it lies.
And unfortunately, because media has become so polarized, again, because of with the current administration and the rhetoric that the vilifying of the media and it's sort of created partisanship within the media that I've not seen in any time in my life, since I've been sort of a sentient being. It's really disturbing, actually.
Is it also the proliferation of media platforms that have kind of allowed people to create their own kind of parallel universes?
Or their silos of information, yeah,
There's
absolutely.
lots of places you can go to, and it's oh, well, this one fits, it's like choose your own adventure, but with what perspective you want to be exposed to, essentially. So I think that part is really challenging because we can't undo that part.
Yeah.
We can work on the partisanship, but I don't think we can undo the proliferation angle. So.
Can
I
speak to
say
Mark
one
Zuckerberg?
other thing? I think also...
You should be up here.
No, I just think because I'm immersed in this question of immigration, and I also think that it's going to be hard to get those diverse opinions in the room if we don't acknowledge the need for security in tandem with staying true to our values. And we also tend to remain silent on the security issue, which is the hot button issue for people who would like to deport everybody who is here undocumented, or here having had a minor violation, like trying to forge a piece of paper so they could get a job. That should not get you deported because you want to work. So we need to acknowledge, I think, the counter argument and help kind of bring this back to a place that's not bumper sticker simplistic. That will help us immensely as well, in my humble opinion.
Thank you.
Can I add something?
Sure, please.
I also think it's very important not to try to tell these stories to other people just to let them know what's going on, but also with immigrants and refugees, there's many people that they just want to hide because they've been told once and again that they don't matter, that they're criminal, again, the same anti-immigrant discourse. And so they act, I mean, imagine if you're told once and again that you don't matter, don't speak, you don't matter, you just, I mean, you don't belong here. So I think telling them that they matter, and first they have to know that how important they are, and then they have to demand their rights, because that's also very important. Their voice is very important.
Did you want to say something, Jill? Okay. We have another question here, and then Jason. Let's let her go first. Oh, okay. It's connected. Okay.
Oh, sorry. My question really is about kind of like your varying background. So you have some people on this panel who can speak to their experiences very personally, and to the stories that they've been documenting. They have a very personal connection with. And we have individuals on the panel who are from a different country and are going to another country and telling that story. And so I'm curious what you think like those varying backgrounds have, like what the benefit is of telling stories that might be from a different culture than yours, and what are the downfalls? And can you talk about that a little bit?
So it's the insider-outsider question.
Yeah.
That's historically, for most of the world, it's been outsiders telling the story. It's been white American and European men parachuting in and telling the stories and missing a large amount of the story. But on the flip side, there's a tremendous advantage of having people who are knowledgeable about a story. You get much better journalism, including people of all different kinds of backgrounds because of that. I don't think it means there's no role for an outsider, that only people from a community should tell the story, but clearly there's real benefits when people who understand, the story and bring a certain knowledge of it to the storytelling. But this is something we've discussed a bunch. And Griselda's not Mexican, she's Spanish. But you did live in Mexico for a while.
Are you legal?
So I think there's both, the answer is yes, we should have diverse storytellers. It's critical. You just have bad journalism, you have bad storytelling if you don't have all kinds of diversity, not just gender, not just race. Class is hugely important. Sexual orientation, all kinds of different experiences. People who are in the military. Every kind of experience adds in a newsroom, adds to your journalistic chops.
Can you provide an example? I mean, I'm a photojournalist, so I know examples of my own, but I think some people in the room would like to see a specific example or hear of one where like someone from outside of a community came in and was able to document a story that was really effective in the policy world.
Maggie Stieber, she speaks Creole. She's been to Haiti so many times, over 30 years, that every Haitian photographer I know thinks she does as good a job as anyone ever has of explaining Haiti to people. But it's because she didn't parachute in. She goes back and goes back and knows the people and contributes through educational programs that she helped set up. And she appreciates and is humble, about her understanding. So yes, there's lots of people who've done great work who are outsiders.
And I think this could also, I think this could also speak to what you were saying earlier too, is like, how do we bridge that divide? And one of those ways might be to have people from a different place coming and learning more and being able to go and say, this is the story of what's going on here. These are...
Well, yeah, but the role, of the journalist isn't like for the place to educate the person.
But I'd also say that it's never been a more exciting time and progressive time in the sense that there are more and more folks, sort of indigenous folks who are covering their own story than I can remember in my lifetime. And certainly, I know like at VII in my agency, we promote that actively, and we're not the only ones who do that. So I've mentored an Iraqi photographer in Iraq, so that, and the other thing I want to say is the format in which we can tell stories. For me, working in video or multimedia, or just introducing audio to your photography can be a way to empower the voices of your subjects. And that's something that I think is critically important. So while I may go to another place as the outsider to make the images, I am not telling you the story. It's the folks there that are telling the story. So for me, I found that to be a very exciting, empowering way to bridge some of this sort of inside-outsider thing. But it's never, I'm telling you, there's so much rapid change. And your question reflects a question that I think we hear, and it's just in the firmament right now, this idea. But I also want to say that sometimes it's weird, like in our other Anderson Ranch cohort, there's a great young female filmmaker who's doing something on this amazing 10-year-old trans girl in North Carolina, and she's started to get like shit that why, how can you tell that story because she's straight? And that's dangerous to me. Mm-hmm. Like, I don't want it to be that, you can only tell stories about white men in New York City or whatever, you know what I mean? It's like that would be so detrimental to all of us. But anyway. Okay,
but one last thing on that, which is there's been this wonderful, particularly focus the last couple of years. At Lens, it's sort of been a core value to talk about how people are represented. And one of the ways you can make better representation is to have more diverse storytellers. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And in the last, and it's something that we discuss all the time. But in the last year, there's been a few organizations which came up, Women Photograph and Diversify, which have pushed that further to have, with Women Photograph, it turns out on the front page of the major newspapers, less than 20% of the photos are taken by women, sometimes 10%, which means then actually we're seeing the world through men's eyes, mainly in the media. Brent Lewis is here, who is here, founded Diversify, which is an organization trying to get photo editors to use photographers of color. I mean, the percentage of photographers who are assigned of color is very low. I mean, I don't know if you have a guess, but it's shockingly low. So there's been this great conversation, which particularly increasing in the last 2 years, moving towards action of trying to put pressure.
Thank you. So one final question with my friend Jason here, and then I have some closing announcements for all of us.
Is it on? Yes, it is. Welcome. No, so my name is Jason. I did a lot of work in Syria, in the city of Aleppo, and one of the things that I personally do is, instead of trying to bring everyone to you, is to go to them. Like, go to wherever these people live. Like, I play hardcore drums, I come from punk rock bands, and tour, and I take that exact mental approach, which is, I don't care how many people are gonna come. Like, I did speaking tour, and I spoke at the Armenian Museum up in Boston. And they had no idea how many people were going to come. There were 4, right? They were like, it's either going to be 150 or 4. And you never know who's going to be in the room. This elderly man walks in. He was 90. He's like, I heard we were talking about a Holocaust and music, so I figured I had to come. And he was one of the orphan kids from World War II that got put on a boat that our country rejected. And so it just turned into this amazing 2-hour conversation about refugees, like basically what this whole entire panel discussion is about. And that 4 or 5 group completely rippled out into all sorts of other events and things like that. And so I would say that the value is the story, like all the storytelling is absolutely incredible, but to put it in front of the people that don't get it. Because the whole thing with refugees is everyone is here. I'm going to sit down. It's all about humanity. It's like the undertone is we are all the same. We all are striving for the same thing, and everyone is here to try to do the same thing. No matter what your faith is, your government, whatever, everyone understands that. It's figuring out what's the kernel in the bigger story to affect the people that don't get it or don't care. I have a racist truck driving uncle who lives in Texas, who's always like, I hate Muslims. I hate refugees. It's like, my wife is a refugee. She is Chinese from Vietnam. I was like, why do you hate my family? Like, oh, no, your family's great. It's like, just because she's an attractive Asian woman does not make it less, like, your racism is to your family. Like, you have to get that. And so a lot of the times it's like boiling it down to the ultra personal, not the like generalized. When someone thinks refugee, it kind of depends on what's ever in the news. Like, you think Mexican or you think Middle Eastern.
And Jason, Jason's giving a good preview of a talk that he will give at SAIS next month. His work is of Aleppo before the war started, and so that's going to be up in March, and we'll bring him back and to also have some music associated with that.
Take it to the people. That was all I was trying to say.
All right, thank you so much. Anyone want to say a final?
Well, Sarah's here now.
Okay,
So
Sarah is here.
in the back.
Welcome, Sarah.
When you go upstairs and see the exhibit, you will see Sarah's work as well.
So let me,
So come on
please
up.
don't move yet.
But not yet.
So thank you, everyone. This is exactly what we were looking for in having this launch and this conversation with our fine friends who made a big effort to be with us today and put this on. I want to make a plug for another opportunity to see them in June. Here at SAIS, we are hosting an International Photography Festival with my friend Joe Newman. Raise your hand, Joe. And Chris Suspect, where are you? So we are taking on this very ambitious project, which will look at kind of the impact that creative storytelling has on our lives, on policy. There will also be some kind of technical opportunities if you're a photo geek. So please look at the website, focus on the story. Jim and Ed will be there, Salwan will be there, and I'm gonna get these two to join as well if they're interested. Okay, so the reception is on the 8th floor of the library. If you are a student and you know how to get to the library, please get to the library how you normally get to the library. Like, take the elevator that is going to the 6th floor and take the stairs up if you can. That will free up the express elevator, and these are just right by the entrance, which will go straight to the 8th floor. Someone will be in there, and just please be patient with us. It's a small building with just 2 elevators, so take your time getting up there and enjoy yourselves. I will ask that my friends up here will leave first, and so please go up, and they will be available for questions and for you to ask anything you did not have a chance to. So thank you.